Now, I will start by saying, while the topic is relevant to the subject of the conference, for the boys, the men, the unattached males out there, if you need me to tell you how to get a girlfriend, like, it's already over. However, I bring something that might help. Socrates, you heard of him, right? Smarter than I am. This is a book called The Memorabilia by Xenophon, one of the three people whose writing still exists that we have, who knew Socrates personally, knew him face to face, okay? For the mothers of boys or fathers of boys out there, by the way, I highly recommend another book called The Anabasis, the Ascent of Cyrus by Xenophon, the greatest adventure story ever told. Buy that for your kid as soon as you get home. The Wayne Ambler translation, I hasten to add. Now, in all of the Socratic literature, that is, all the dialogues of Plato, the comedies of Aristophanes, and this, he's shown talking to a woman, Socrates, like 3 times, okay? I won't go through all of the instances of it, but in only one of those cases, it was the woman he's talking to. We can prove she actually existed as a historical character. In other words, it's not somebody Plato made up, right? And the conversation wasn't like in recollected speech, like, let me tell you about the time I talked to Betty. It actually happens on stage. So this is presented as a real, as far as we know, a real conversation, the only real conversation Socrates ever has with a woman in the literature, okay? So I found this fascinating. As I read this book in grad school, and it didn't occur to me what this passage was about. There's all these various interpretations of it. And years later, totally for analytical purposes, it's like when there used to be a cliche in the 70s. It was like, why do you have a stack of Playboys? And the man would say, well, I only read it for the articles, right? So I read these back in sort of the heyday of the so-called manosphere. I became interested. This is like 2008, 9, 10, in the pickup blogs. Now, I had been married for a long time, already had a couple of kids. I was only reading it for the articles, for the analytical, sociological, philosophic insights. And as I read it, I thought to myself, wow, this seems really familiar to me. Where have I seen these insights before? And it realized from the Memorabilia, book 3, chapter 11, in which Socrates talks to a woman named Theodote, okay? As I said, a real person. And what happens in that conversation? Well, I'll tell you. As far as I can tell. I brought the book. I'm going to close the book in case I have to quote it for some reason. I don't think I will. Now, what happens is in the action, the dialogue, he's standing around. If you ever read any kind of Socratic dialogue before, you know how these things usually go down. He's talking to some people. They ask some question. He gives an annoying answer. He drives everybody up a wall. The dialogue ends. You haven't really gotten the answer to the question. You just raised a million more questions. But Socrates' characteristic activity is talking, usually to men. In fact, almost always to men. So he's talking at one point at the beginning of this chapter. We don't know what he's talking about. And one of his companions, rushes up to him and says, Socrates, we got to go. We got to go right now. Well, why? Because Theodote is here and she's like receiving visitors and we have to see her. Well, why? Why do I care? He says, because they say that her beauty surpasses speech. And Socrates says, well, I guess we better go have a look because we can't judge in speech what, a physical thing that surpasses speech. The only way to prove it is to go and look. Okay, now who is this Theodote? So they go to her place in Athens. She was what was known in Greek as a heterae. Now, there's a number of ways to translate that. It's usually translated as courtesan, which sounds like just high-class hooker. But there's an element of like the geisha in it too. It's like you're not like the famous mistress of Pericles. Everybody, I'm sure, have heard of Pericles, right? He had a mistress named Aspasia, okay? Really, really famous. Was a heterae. So Theodote was a heterae. It's kind of like you're expected not just to be beautiful, but also to be educated, charming, and the famous Greek drinking parties, the symposium depicted by Plato and by Xenophon, the only women allowed in the symposium were the heterae. You couldn't bring your wife to one. This may be why Athens ultimately lost the Peloponnesian War, but we can leave that aside for another point. So as I go through this, I'm rereading this, I'm thinking, wow, there's an amazing coincidence between the techniques Socrates uses to win Theodote over and the techniques that the pickup artists say that if you want to get a girlfriend or a one-night stand or a wife or whatever, they're value neutral on that point, what you would have to use. And so I'm just going to roll through. I'm probably not going to be able to read more than just a few portions of the highlighted, but these are the subheadings of an article I actually managed to get published in 2014 in a peer-reviewed journal. I can tell you how that happened later. I won't waste time on it now, but it was sort of a miracle. Anyway, the first thing they say is, okay, let's say you got a girl. You want to keep her for a while. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier is, like, if we want more babies, somehow men and women are going to have to get together. So that's why this is relevant to this topic, right? It seems pretty obvious to me, but I'll just state it anyway in case you were wondering. You're going to maintaining attraction, right? You can't just initially be attractive. You got to somehow maintain attraction. So how does Xenophon show this? I think there's one very, very interesting way in which he shows it, in which you got to leave this text and go to another text called the Economicus, or the Skilled Household Manager, in which one of the central conversations is this perfect gentleman who owns a perfect Greek farm explaining to Socrates how he educated his wife and how he sort of rules the household and how it's all going to work out. Okay? End of conversation. Xenophon doesn't tell you in that book the ending of the story, which is quite bad. The wife's name was apparently Chrysilla. She left her husband and became the mistress of her son-in-law, that is, her own daughter's husband. The daughter then tried to hang herself in despair, was discovered, and her suicide was presented. Now, this whole sordid outcome, if you tie it back to what we see is Comicus explaining to Socrates how he deals with his wife, he's just talking about weights and measures. He's talking about money. He's talking about the orderliness of the pantry and how she takes care of the goats and this and that. He's all about the economics of the marriage and the household management. There's nothing erotic, attractive, or even the least bit interesting about this guy. And there's this massive age gap between his Comicos and Chrysilla. He says he married her when she was like 15, and we don't know how old he was. We'll just take a number at random from Aristotle's Politics. He says men shouldn't get married until they're 37. Right? So let's say there's 22 years there, right? And the whole thing ends disastrously because this dullard couldn't maintain attraction, I would submit to you. I can give you some other examples from the literature, but I'll pass those over. So a second pickup artist tenet is something they used to call outcome independence. What does they mean by that? It means you have to genuinely, if you want to succeed, they would say, remember, this is just them talking. I'm only passing this along. I endorse none of it. They would say, you have to, at best of all, you have to genuinely not care if you ask a girl for a date and she says no. Like, you can't care. Best of all is if you really don't care. But if it does burn your soul inside, you at least need to pretend that you don't care. And it has to be believable pretension, right? You got to fake it, the old Hollywood saying. If you can fake sincerity, you've got it made. So she has to believe that you don't care, right? This is demonstrated in this little dialogue where Theodote is used to having people come to her and basically beg her to take them on as clients. And Socrates comes to her with a genuine attitude of outcome independence. He really doesn't care what she thinks of him. Genuinely deep down, he doesn't care. And it works best because he doesn't show it. He doesn't just show it. He actually feels it. And there's a kinship, too, between Theodote and Socrates in the sense that Xenophon says in the text that, she was used to, or she could consort or deal with, kresthai in Greek, those who persuaded her. In other words, you could come and say, Theodote, I really, can you come sing at my party? And she could look you up and down and go, no, you just look bad or whatever, I'm not interested. The similar thing with Socrates, that there were a lot of people in Athens who wanted to talk to Socrates. All the dialogues depict this. He had this incredibly circle. At the innermost ring of the circle would have been somebody like Plato and Xenophon, and then outer and further outer rings. And then there were people who wanted to talk to him desperately because he was the wisest man. The Delphic Oracle said that. He was the wisest man in Greece. And he just didn't want to talk to because he thought they were uninteresting and he couldn't teach them anything and they couldn't learn anything from him, right? So they both can afford to be choosy, but Theodote is usually in a position of having, a bunch of slobbering men surrounding her, begging for her attention. And now she has this fat, bald, ugly guy. Have you ever seen a statue or a picture of Socrates? He's not attractive conventionally. And he's got a pug nose and he's, right? And she's expecting them all to slaver over her. And some of his followers clearly are, including the young man who says, let's run and go talk to her right now. And he's keeping his distance from her. He's completely outcome independent. So I have to, unfortunately, the clock's just flying by on me, sad, because there's another story in another book called the Cyropedia that I would love to tell, but I can't. One-itis, okay? Just think of the number one hyphen ITS, like inflammation, right? This is what the pickup artists say. It's like if you get so infatuated with one girl that you can't get over it, even after she dumps you, like you're never gonna get anywhere. The worst thing is to feel it. Same problem we have here. The second worst thing is to feel it. The worst thing of all is to feel it and show it, right? if you feel it, you got to find a way to hide it, right? Well, a love that shows through mopey, despondent behavior is the thing that gets you into a lot of trouble. Now I will tell this other story, okay? So in the Cyropaedia, which is Xenophon's book about the Emperor Cyrus the Great who founded the Persian Empire, one of his lieutenants comes to Cyrus after they've won a battle, and he says, hey, boss, remember, this is the ancient Greek world, especially the ladies. Try not to get super offended here, but things were a little bit different then, and they were not up to the norms that we would expect today. It's like, well, we captured a lot of prizes, including some pretty girls, and we saved the prettiest one for you. And Cyrus says, this is how the Iliad begins, right? Nobody should be too scandalized. And Cyrus says, no, I keep her away from me. I don't even want to look at her. As soon as I look at her, I will not be able to concentrate, and I won't get any of my work done. And this attendant who's with him, Araspes, our lieutenant, laughs and says, now remember though, Cyrus won't even look at her because he's afraid she'll distract him. Whereas as soon as somebody says to Socrates, her beauty surpasses speech, his immediate reaction is, well, let's go have a look. He's not worried about what will happen to himself, Socrates is, if he looks at Theodote. He can't be bowled over and mesmerized by Theodote in a way that will take him away from his work. Whereas Cyrus, emperor of Persia, is worried about it. So he says, okay, he assigns her to this guy, Araspes, and says, you take care of her. And he says, but you should be careful, she might get under your skin, anything can happen. And Araspes says, don't worry about me, man, I can completely handle it. And of course, he falls madly, insanely in love with her. His story ends badly. Cyrus ends up laughing at him. And exactly what Cyrus predicted for this poor man happens. And furthermore, this woman's name is Panthea. And her husband, who is a king, a defeated king, is so great. Cyrus returns Panthea to her husband, unmolested in any way. And he's so grateful that he allies himself with Cyrus, against his wife's advice, by the way, and fights a battle in which he's killed. And she's so angry at this. She says, basically, this guy tricked you. He gave me back to you. This is sort of in the text. I mean, she's saying this after his death, but wailing about it, in order to cement your loyalty, and then your loyalty he just used, and you end up dead from it. And she's so angry that she kills herself in despair. Okay. Contrast, well, I don't have time for that. Another phrase from one of my subheadings is NAWALT. Okay, this is an acronym for not all women are like that. If you read that on a pickup artist blog, what it means is all women are like that. Okay. It's the typical objection to a generalization. A single exception proves the rule, okay? I would say, though, that what Xenophon does here, look at how he depicts the two poles in a way of, you have Chrysilla, the wife of Iscomicus, extremely disloyal, okay? You have Panthea, the other opposite pole, extremely loyal, kills herself because of her husband's foolishness, even though he had not betrayed her in any way. I think Xenophon is there trying to show you the complete extremes. Okay? Abundance mentality is another thing that you get from the pickup artist blogs, right? What does that mean? It means that it's a foundation of outcome independence and the antidote to one-itis. You have to believe, if you're going to succeed at this game, they would say, that there are, quote unquote, as the old saying goes, plenty of fish in the sea, okay? And that if you get shot down, somebody breaks up with you, you just kind of roll with it and know that I'll get another one in a couple of hours, or tomorrow, next week at the latest, okay? What you don't want to do is get mopey or adopt scarcity mentality, okay? That's a turnoff. Now, Socrates goes into this conversation with Theodote with complete abundance mentality. He doesn't care if she talks to him, if she wants to become part of his circle. There's always plenty of fish in the sea for Socrates. One of the meanings, by the way, of this whole chapter, book 3, chapter 11, there's many layers to it, but it is a parody. It is meant to be kind of a parody of Socrates and his circle and their reputation in Athens. So maybe there's somebody Socrates really wants to talk to. We know that when he was younger, he was extremely interested in Alcibiades, the famous traitor who ran off with the Spartans in the middle of the Peloponnesian War. Well, for every Alcibiades or Critias who gets away, there's another Apollodorus or Euthyphro or somebody else, right? Socrates, he's not that worried about it. He always goes into this with abundance mentality. I wish I could read some passages from the dialogue, but I don't really have time, because these two are demonstrated in the action of the dialogue. One is called demonstrating higher value, and the other is called setting the frame, okay? This means again, in the pickup artist lingo, which I reject, to generate and maintain attraction, a man must convince a woman that, at least in those traits she most cares about, his status is higher than her status, right? Okay? Now, this seems preposterous from the point of view of Socrates versus Theodote. She has money, he has no money. He's famously poor. Socrates says, I live in 10,000-fold poverty. He says that in the Apology, right? He's ugly, she's beautiful. She has conventional status. He's despised in Athens except by his circle. She can go to the best parties, right? I guess he goes to one good party that we know of, the symposium depicted in Plato's Symposium, the Agathon's party. But their conventional status is like head cheerleader versus the lowest dork in the math club, okay? So he should have no shot at maintaining her interest at all whatsoever. But he does so in the action of the conversation through wit, especially, and by using his dialectical skill that we see on display in a lot of the other dialogues to put her on her back foot and cause her to be confused. And essentially what he's trying to do in the course of this conversation is to make her want to impress him. Right? To make her think like, okay, this guy is actually cleverer than I am, and he can say and do things with words that I can barely follow. If only I can impress him. And let's keep in mind, too, that what he's doing in the course of this conversation, we know he's got an audience around him, right? So we can examine how he speaks to Theodote and try to learn some lessons from that, just in regard to their own personal interactions. But he's also putting on a show for his crew who are around him. And we know, because Xenophon says so, that among others, Alcibiades is there, okay? Critias is there. I don't know if you know any of these names, but these are some of the people who are the most prominent in Socrates' circle and who went on to play a very prominent role in the Peloponnesian War and in its aftermath. Another one, okay? Compliance tests. It's a bit of lingo. It has another word I won't use because it's not family friendly, and this is a Natalism conference. That is compliance. Tests in that other rendering, it comes out the same. They both test one another, and that is to say, they give each other little commands or prompts and see if the other will follow. But Socrates doesn't follow any of hers in the course of this. However, he gets her to follow his. The greatest illustration on a pickup artist blog of what a compliance test is they say, now, I haven't been on a date since, I don't remember, 1997, something like that. So I have no idea if any of this works. But, never buy a woman a drink. Get her to buy you a drink. If you actually want to date her, or you want to, whatever you want to do, you don't oh, what can I do for you? That doesn't work. You got to get her to start doing things for you, and then she'll like you more. And Xenophon shows this in action in the way that Socrates deals with Theodote. He turns the tables on her. Right? He gets her to agree to things ostensibly against her interests and even, in a way, against her will. And he starts to, in the way the rest of it, I'm out of time here, but the way the rest of it plays out is her completely accepting his frame and saying, okay, Socrates, how do I run my own business better? You seem to understand this better than I am. If my business is, quote unquote, hunting friends, as it says in the text, how do I hunt friends better? And Socrates proceeds to explain to her, how you ought to do this, and you ought to be doing this, and you ought not be doing that, and so on and so forth. One very quick one, I'm skipping a couple of these, is push-pull. Okay, this is, again, from their lingo, but it's illustrated in this dialogue. It basically means to sort of run hot and cold. And Socrates recommends to Theodote, now he's telling you, I, Socrates, who am not a heteri, I shouldn't know anything about this, and you who are, but I'm going to tell you how to do your job better than you will. And one of the things he recommends to her is he says, what you want to do is induce desire, flee, wait to be chased, and then stir desire to a fever pitch. Just always run hot and cold, right? It's textbook push-pull, and it's all here in a book written 2,500 years ago. I just want to say at the very end, so I'm skipping the rest of this too, so that I end on time. So Theodote, Socrates says something like, you learn how to cast a spell, and that's how you catch people in your web. And she asks for the spell, and Socrates says, no, I'm not going to tell you the spell. He says, if you want to have it, you're going to have to come to me sometime when I'm, you can come to me later. She says she will, and she asks in a kind of pleading way, can I come and see you? If I come and see you, will you explain this to me? And Socrates says, finally, he says, maybe. And this is a direct quote. If no other females dearer to me than you happen to be around at that time. Which is an especially ironic point because he never talks to any other females, right? He's only ever talking to men. One of the few times we ever see him talking to a female is in the Phaedo. That's the one where he drinks the hemlock and dies. When his wife, Xanthippe, comes in crying and screaming, he doesn't even talk to her. He says to his friend Crito, you better get her out of here. So who are these females? I would submit to you that they are the philosophic circle that he keeps around him. The point, though, is at the end that the tables have been completely turned, solely through speech. The spider has become the fly. Frankly, the spider, Socrates, doesn't even want to, he doesn't even want her, really. He just wants to play the game and show how it can be played as a little bit of performance art, I think, for his circle. But we can still learn something from this in ways that I think are surprising, but that I think Xenophon actually intended and that I think a lot of people over the years have missed. So there you go. If you don't want to read, all 17 years of Chateau Artiste and various other pickup blogs because it's too long and complicated and involved and gets a little vulgar, this is only like 7 pages, and it's all in here.